The first time Anna Lawson saw August Monroe, he was standing on the roof of his barn at dawn, nailing boards with the kind of focused fury that made it very clear he did not want company, did not need company, and would be perfectly content if the rest of the world simply ceased to exist before breakfast. She had been sitting on the buckboard of her father's old wagon, which had lost a wheel just at the bend in the road half a mile outside of Harlan Creek, Colorado, in the spring of 1882. The axle had cracked with a sound like a rifle shot somewhere around midnight, and she had spent the remaining dark hours wrapped in her father's old wool coat, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead and listening to the coyotes carry on their mournful conversations across the high desert. When the sun came up and she finally saw signs of life, that solitary figure hammering on a rooftop in the gold light, she had climbed down from the wagon, gathered her skirts, and walked straight toward him across the scrub. She cupped her hands around her mouth and called up, "Good morning. I am terribly sorry to bother you, but my wagon has lost a wheel, and I wonder if you might have a spare." He did not stop hammering. He did not look down. After a long enough pause that she began to wonder whether he was deaf or simply decided not to be, he said flatly, "I don't." She looked around the property. There was very clearly visible behind the barn a perfectly good wagon wheel leaning against a fence post. "What about that one?" she called up pleasantly. He stopped hammering then. He looked down at her with eyes the color of winter clouds, gray and flat and entirely unwelcoming. He was perhaps 30 years old, lean and sun-darkened, with a jaw that looked like it had been carved from something harder than ordinary bone. He had a 3-day beard and hands wrapped in work leather, and an expression that communicated very efficiently that whatever patience he had woken up with had already been used up before she arrived. "That one's spoken for," he said. "By whom?" He stared at her. She stared back. She had large brown eyes and a calm, open face and the particular posture of a woman who had decided long ago that stubbornness was simply another word for patience. "By me," he said finally. "And what do you intend to use it for?" He looked at the wheel. He looked back at her. Something crossed his face that was not quite frustration and not quite anything else she could name. "My other wagon," he said. "Do you have a second wagon?" A very long pause. "No." "Then I wonder," she said, and her voice was perfectly kind, perfectly reasonable, "if I might borrow it as far as town. I can have your wheel back to you by Thursday. I am heading to Harlan Creek to take up the teaching position at the schoolhouse." He climbed down from the roof with the economical movements of a man who had been climbing and building and working alone for a very long time. He was tall, she noticed, taller than she had expected. He landed on the ground and picked up a hammer he had left leaning against the barn wall and did not look at her while he said, "Thursday." "I promise," she said. "People say that," he said, and walked past her toward the wheel, lifted it without apparent effort, and rolled it in the direction of her wagon without another word. She followed him, because there seemed to be nothing else to do. He fitted the wheel onto the axle with practiced efficiency, crouching in the dirt and working with the focus of someone who was very good at solving problems that did not involve other human beings. She stood nearby and watched and said, "I am Anna Lawson." He did not say anything. "And you are," he tightened a bolt, "Monroe. Is that a first name or a last name?" He stood up and looked at her with those flat gray eyes, and she had the very distinct impression that he was calculating the precise minimum number of words required to end this conversation. "Last," he said. "What is your first?" The pause was so long that a meadowlark had time to land on a nearby fence post, sing 4 bars of something cheerful, and fly away again before he said, "August." "August Monroe," she said, and smiled at him. "It is a very fine name. Thank you, August Monroe. I will have your wheel back to you by Thursday." He said nothing. He picked up his hammer and walked back to his barn. She drove the wagon into Harlan Creek with the morning sun at her back, and the feeling, which she could not entirely account for, that she had just met someone who mattered. Harlan Creek was a proper town by 1882 standards, which meant it had a main street of packed dirt, a general store run by a man named Eli Prout, who smelled permanently of pipe tobacco and optimism, a saloon called the Silver Mare that kept respectable hours most days of the week, a church with a good bell, a doctor's office, a telegraph office, and a two-room schoolhouse that had been without a teacher for the better part of 8 months. The previous teacher, a young man from Ohio named Fletcher, had lasted one winter and then headed back east with the firm conviction that Colorado had been a mistake. Anna Lawson was not from the east. She was from Pueblo, born to a schoolteacher mother and a cattle-ranching father who had died when she was 22, leaving her the ranch, which she had sold, and the conviction that teaching was the most useful thing a person could do with their time. She was 26 years old, had a trunk full of books, and had taken the position in Harlan Creek because it was available, and because she had a talent for starting over in new places and making them feel like home. She took a room at the boarding house run by a widow named Martha Crane, who had opinions about everything and was generous with all of them. Martha fed her a good breakfast, showed her a clean room with a window that looked out over the street, and within the first hour had told Anna everything she needed to know about Harlan Creek and several things she had not asked for, including the information that the ranch at the edge of town, the one with the broken-down fences and the solitary figure who never came into town except for supplies, belonged to August Monroe. "Lost his wife 2 years back," Martha said, topping off Anna's coffee with the air of someone delivering the most important sentence of the morning. "Catherine Monroe. Fever took her in the winter of 1880. They had been married 4 years. He has not spoken more than 10 words in a row to anyone in this town since they put her in the ground. People say he is strange now. I say he is grieving, which is a different thing entirely, though some people cannot tell the difference." Anna wrapped her hands around her coffee cup and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "Does he have any family nearby?" "Not a soul," Martha said. "Parents are gone, no brothers or sisters that anyone knows of. He came out here from Kansas with his wife and they built that ranch together from bare ground. People say before she died he was, well, different. He used to come to the dances. He used to laugh." She paused. "I have not heard that man laugh in 2 years." Anna thought about gray eyes and a jaw cut from hard stone and a wheel offered without a word and said, "That is a very sad thing." "It is," said Martha Crane. "But sad things do not fix themselves by leaving them alone. Someone ought to knock on that man's door." "Yes," said Anna Lawson, and thought about it. She did not knock on his door. She drove out on Thursday with his wheel tied to the back of a borrowed wagon and found him in the fields behind the house, repairing fence line, and she tied the wheel to his fence post with a piece of rope and left a jar of strawberry preserves beside it, which she had made herself the previous afternoon using fruit from Eli Prute's general store. There was a note tucked under the jar that said, "Thank you for the wheel. The preserves are in payment. Anna Lawson." She drove back to town without seeing whether he came to collect it. The next week, she settled into the schoolhouse with 17 children between the ages of 6 and 14, a stove that drew badly in the wind, 3 boxes of primers she had brought from Pueblo, and the particular satisfaction of a purpose clearly defined. She was a good teacher. She had her mother's gift for making difficult things seem approachable, and she was patient in the way of people who genuinely like other people and find them interesting. The children of Harlan Creek were a mixed population ranching families, the children of miners, one small boy named Thomas whose father ran the telegraph office and who asked more questions per hour than any child she had ever encountered, and a pair of twins named Rosie and Clara Prute who were Eli's daughters and who had already decided that Miss Lawson was the best thing that had happened to them since Christmas. She settled in. She learned the town. She learned which families were struggling and which were comfortable, which men drank too much on Saturday nights, and which wives kept the households running with quiet competence, which children were hungry in the mornings and needed an extra biscuit before the lessons began. She kept a tin of biscuits in the schoolhouse desk for that purpose and never made a fuss about it. She also, on her days off, began the habit of driving out past the Monroe ranch. It was not strictly on the way to anywhere. She told herself, It was because the road that passed his property was the prettiest road near town, which was true. It ran along a ridge that looked out over a wide valley, and the mountains beyond were still snow-capped in April, and the light in the late afternoon had a particular golden quality that made everything look like something worth painting. She told herself these things, and they were all true, and they were also not the only reason. She began to notice the ranch changing slowly. A new fence post where a rotted one had been, a mended gate, the barn roof where she had first seen him, now solidly patched. He was fixing the place up board by board, nail by nail, in the methodical way of someone who fills the hours with labor because the alternative is worse. Once she saw him in the field with a horse she had not seen before, a big roan that he was working on a long lead, and she stopped the wagon and watched for a few minutes without him seeming to notice, and she thought, "He is so alone. He is so extraordinarily, deliberately alone, and it is going to eat him alive if someone does not do something about it." She drove home and thought about what to do. The next morning she went to Eli Prute's store and asked him if he could get her some seeds, flower seeds specifically. She wanted marigolds, she said, and black-eyed Susans and some lavender if he could manage it, and maybe some sweet peas because they climbed, and she had an idea. Eli, who was a good-natured man and did not ask unnecessary questions, said he could have them in 2 weeks. She thanked him and went back to her schoolhouse, and in the evenings she began to plan. She told no one. She told Martha, who could not be kept out of things entirely, only that she was going to do a small bit of gardening, and Martha said that was a fine idea. The boarding house had a perfectly good patch of ground by the front porch, and Anna said yes, she was thinking of that too. 2 weeks later, when the seeds arrived, she divided them. Half went to the boarding house patch by the front porch. The other half she put in a box in the back of the wagon. On a warm Saturday morning in early May, she drove out to the Monroe ranch. She did not go to the door. She turned off the road at the fence line, found a spot near the gate where the ground was soft and south-facing and got a good amount of sun through most of the day, and she got out of the wagon, put on her work gloves, and started planting. She planted marigolds along the fence line. She planted sweet peas at the base of the fence post so they would climb. She put black-eyed Susans in a wider drift further back, where there was good open ground. She worked steadily and quietly, and the morning was warm and the birds were loud, and she was completely absorbed in the work when a shadow fell over her. She looked up. August Monroe was standing 6 feet away, looking at her with an expression she could not quite read. He was wearing his work clothes, canvas trousers, a dark shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, and he had his hat in his hand, which she noticed, because it suggested he had come out deliberately rather than just happening upon her. "What are you doing?" he said. "Planting flowers," she said. He looked at the neat rows of seeds she had put in, the little sticks she had used to mark the rows, the watering can she had brought. His expression did not change, but something in it shifted slightly, like a door that has been nudged without quite opening. "On my property," he said. "Along your fence line," she agreed cheerfully. "Just outside it, actually. I believe this is technically the road allowance, which is public ground." She stood up and brushed dirt from her gloves. "Though I did not actually check the deed, so I apologize if I am wrong about that." He looked at the road. He looked at the fence. He looked at her. "They will not grow," he said. "Ground is too dry." "I am going to water them," she said. "I have a barrel in the wagon. I will come back and water them. You will not need to do anything at all." "I did not ask to do anything," he said, somewhat sharply. "I know," she said. "That is rather the point." He put his hat back on his head. He looked at the freshly turned earth, the carefully placed seeds. Something happened in his gray eyes that she would not have known to name if she had not grown up around her father, who had lost her mother when Anna was 14, and had spent the following years building the fence of himself higher and higher until he forgot there was a door. "What kind?" he said, so quietly she almost missed it. She looked up. "I beg your pardon. What kind of flowers?" "Marigolds," she said, And black-eyed Susan, sweet peas along the post there they will climb, I thought it would be nice. He looked at the fence post. He looked away at the mountains. His jaw was working slightly, the way jaws do when people are swallowing something they had not expected to feel. My wife liked marigolds, he said. Then he turned and walked back to the house and did not come out again while she was there. She finished planting. She drove home. She sat on the edge of her bed that evening and put her face in her hands for a moment, not because she was sad exactly, but because some moments require a pause to honor what has happened in them. She went back 3 times that week to water the seeds. He was not visible the first 2 times. The third time, a Thursday, she arrived to find that someone had placed a rough wooden bench beside the fence line, low and unfinished but clearly newly made, positioned so that a person sitting on it would have the best view of the stretch of ground she had planted. She looked at it for a long time. Then she sat on it and watered the seeds from there, and looked out at the mountains that were starting to lose their snow, and felt something quiet and warm move through her chest. She did not see him, but she noticed that the bench was exactly the right height for someone to sit and watch a garden, and it had not been there before. The marigolds came up in the second week. She had been tending them each visit with such care that the first tiny green shoots pushing through the packed earth felt like a small miracle, and she let herself be genuinely delighted by them in the uncomplicated way of people who have not decided that joy requires irony to be acceptable. On the day the first marigold showed a bud, August Monroe was standing at the fence when she arrived. He had his arms folded and was looking at the row of small green plants with an expression that was carefully neutral, but not entirely successfully so. "The sweet peas are taking," she said, pointing to the fence post, where 2 thin tendrils had found the rough wood and wrapped themselves around it. "I see them," he said. She got her watering can and started her work. After a moment, without looking up, she said, "How is the roan?" He was quiet for long enough that she wondered whether he would answer. Then he said, settling, "He was badly handled before I got him, spooked at everything." "It takes time." "Yes," she said. "Things that have been hurt take time, that is very true." She did not look at him, she kept watering, but she could feel the weight of the silence shift, the way the air changes before rain. "You are very persistent," he said. "I prefer the word dedicated," she said pleasantly. Something crossed his face. It was there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it, but she thought, though she was not certain, that it might have been the beginning of a smile. He did not stay. He unfolded his arms and went back toward the barn. But at the gate he stopped and said, without turning around, "There is a well on the south side of the barn. The water is colder. Better for plants, if you want." "Thank you," she said. He walked on. She put down her watering can and looked at the growing row of marigolds and felt the same warm thing she had felt when she found the bench, only slightly larger now and considerably more certain of what it was. She started using the well. It meant going into the property, which required passing through the gate and along the path to the south side of the barn. The first time she did it, she was very deliberately casual about the whole thing, filling her barrel from the well and carrying it back out to the garden as though this were a completely ordinary arrangement, and not the small significant concession that it was. August was in the barn. She could hear him working, the particular rhythm of someone brushing down a horse, the low, even sounds he made to the roan, which were different from the way he spoke to people, softer and steadier. She did not go into the barn. She filled her barrel and went back to her garden. But a week after that, when she came to fill her barrel, he was crouching beside the well making some adjustment to the mechanism, and he looked up when she came around the corner and said, without apparent embarrassment, "Chain was wearing on the edge. I replaced it." "That was kind," she said. He stood up. They were standing about 4 feet apart, and she noticed that he did not immediately step back or look away, which was new. He looked at her directly with those serious gray eyes, and she looked back, and the morning air was full of the smell of sage and horse and new wood. "You teach the Prout girls," he said. "I do," she said. "Rosie and Clara, they are very bright. Especially Rosie, she has a real gift for arithmetic. She works the problems faster than some adults I have known." Something moved across his face. "That sounds like something Catherine would have said." He stopped as though surprised by his own words. Anna waited. She did not rush him. "She was a teacher," he said. "Before, back in Kansas. She stopped when we came out here because there was too much else to do. She used to say she missed it." He looked down at the well chain in his hands. "I built a schoolhouse for her on the east side of the property. Never got finished." "I would like to see it," Anna said, and she meant it simply and without agenda. He looked at her. She could see him turning that over, examining it for something and apparently not finding it, or perhaps finding something unexpected. "It's not much," he said. "4 walls and a floor, no roof yet." "4 walls and a floor is a start," she said. He looked at her for another moment. Then he said, "I will show you on Saturday." She nodded. She filled her barrel and went back to her garden and watered the marigolds and the black-eyed Susans, which were growing fast now in the warm May sun, and the sweet peas, which had climbed fully a foot up the fence post, and she thought about an unfinished schoolhouse and a man who had built it for someone he was still carrying everywhere he went. Saturday came with a blue sky and a wind from the west that smelled like wildflowers from higher up the valley. She arrived at the ranch at 9 in the morning, and August was waiting by the gate, which she noticed without making a thing of it. He led her around the east side of the house along a path through the tall grass, and there was the schoolhouse, small, solidly built, 4 walls of good timber and a pine floor that had weathered 2 Colorado winters without warping. The roof joists were in place but unsheathed. The window frames were cut but had no glass. It sat in the morning light with the particular quiet of something that had been built with love and left with grief. She stood in the doorway and looked in. The floor was swept. She noticed that it had been swept recently. "I swept it," he said from behind her, as though he had noticed her noticing. "Last week. I do not know why I did." "I think you do," she said gently. He was quiet. She stepped inside and walked to the window frame and looked out through the opening at the long grass and the mountains beyond, and she said, "It is a beautiful sight. She would have loved it here." "She did," he said. "She used to come out and sit on the floor and look at that view. She said the mountains looked different from here than from anywhere else on the property." He paused. "I think she was right." Anna turned around. He was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed and his hat low, and the light coming in from the south made the planes of his face softer somehow, and she thought he was, in this unguarded moment, one of the most quietly heartbreaking people she had ever met. "August," she said, "would you tell me about her? You do not have to, but I think you might want to." He was very still. Outside, a hawk called once, high and thin. "She was from a small town," he said, "smaller than this, Wichita County. She had red hair and she argued about everything, and she was always right, which was infuriating, and she made the best pie I have ever tasted in my life, and when she laughed you could hear it from the next county over." He stopped. His voice had not changed pitch, but it had changed texture. "She was sick for 6 weeks before she died. I could not make her well. I tried everything. The doctor came 3 times from town. I rode to Denver for medicine. None of it." He stopped again. "None of it worked." "I know," Anna said softly. "I think I have been angry about that," he said. "For 2 years. I did not realize until recently that I was angry. I thought I was just quiet." "They feel very similar," she said. "From the inside." He looked at her. Something in his expression was different now. Not open exactly. She did not think he would be open, not for a long time, but the wall had a different quality, like the fence line where the marigolds were growing. Something was happening to it from the outside in. "Why are you here?" he said. "Why do you keep coming out here?" She thought about that honestly. "Because you seemed like someone worth knowing," she said. "And I thought if I waited for you to decide that yourself, we would both be very old before it happened." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "That bench." "Yes," she said. "I built it the morning after you planted the first seeds. I do not know what I thought I was doing. I told myself it was, I don't know what I told myself." "It was kind," she said. "I am not kind," he said. "August Monroe," she said, and her voice was firm and gentle at once, "you built an entire schoolhouse for your wife. You gave me a wagon wheel that first morning even though you clearly did not want to. You replaced the well chain so the water would be easier for me to draw. You swept this floor last week. I think you are considerably kinder than you want people to know." He looked away. He looked out through the unglazed window at the mountains his wife had loved, and the jaw she could see from the side was working again, with that particular effort of someone trying to stay contained. She did not push. She turned and looked at the mountains too, and they stood in the unfinished schoolhouse together in the warm May morning and were quiet together for a long time, and it was the most companionable silence she had experienced in longer than she could immediately remember. After a while he said, "I will finish the roof this summer. I think I should finish it." "I think so too," she said. He said nothing more, and she walked back with him to the gate and collected her horse and rode back to town in the late morning, with her heart doing something it had not done in quite this way before. June brought heat and high grass, and the marigolds came up in a full bright riot of orange and yellow along the fence line that was visible from the road, and caused passing riders to slow their horses and look and wonder. The sweet peas had climbed 3 feet up the fence post, and were producing small pink flowers that trembled in the afternoon wind. The black-eyed Susans were fat-budded and golden and ready to burst, and Anna would arrive in the mornings and fill her barrel at the well, and sometimes August would be there, and sometimes he would not, but when he was there he had started to stay a little longer. He told her things, not all at once, and not easily, but in the gradual way of a man who has forgotten how conversation works and is relearning it one sentence at a time. He told her about growing up in Kansas, the youngest of 3 brothers, both of whom were dead now, one in the war, one in a flood the year before. He told her about how he had learned to work horses from his father, who had been silent and difficult, and had still managed to teach him patience and precision, and the particular satisfaction of doing something physical well. He told her he had read every book on the property, which numbered 11, and had memorized most of them out of pure necessity during the long winters when there was nothing else to do. She told him about Pueblo, about her mother and father, about learning to read under a lamp at the kitchen table while her father graded papers, about loving the work of teaching from the first day she stood in front of a class and realized that she was, in this specific context, exactly the right size and shape for the world. She told him about selling the ranch after her father died and feeling both relieved and terrible about feeling relieved. She told him about the trip to Harlan Creek and the broken axle and waiting in the dark for the sun to come up. "You did not seem frightened," he said. "When you walked up that morning, I had been watching from the roof." She looked at him with some amusement. "You watched me walk across the field. I saw someone coming," he said, with the dignity of a man who does not backtrack easily. "I watched to see if it was trouble. And what did you decide?" He looked at the mountains. "I was not sure," he said, and then after a pause, "I am still not sure." She laughed. It was genuine, bright, a little startled out of her. He looked at her quickly, as though the sound had surprised him, and something happened in his face, something that was not quite the smile she had seen the ghost of before, but was closer to it, a softening around the eyes that she thought might be the precursor to something he had not let himself feel in a very long time. July. The 4th of July brought a celebration in Harlan Creek, a picnic on the green, a speech from the mayor, who was a short, round man named Gerald Hicks, who delivered every statement as though it were the conclusion to a much longer argument, a fireworks display provided by miners who had access to powder and considerable enthusiasm. Everyone in town came. Anna sat with Martha Crane and Eli Prout, and his wife Helen and the children ran through the grass, and someone played a fiddle, and the evening was warm and golden and deeply pleasant. She did not expect to see August Monroe there. She had not expected it, and when she looked up from her conversation with Helen Prout about whether Rosie had a future in mathematics or merely a talent for it, and saw him standing at the edge of the green with a plate of food he was not eating, she felt something very like a door opening in her own chest. She excused herself and walked over to him. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has done something that surprised himself and has not yet decided whether it was a mistake. "I thought I would come to town," he said. "I am very glad," she said. He looked around at the crowd. She could see it was not comfortable for him, too many people, too much noise after 2 years of near silence. But he was there, and she thought that was considerable. She said, "Come with me," and led him to the edge of the green where there was a big cottonwood tree, and it was quieter, and the light came through the leaves in a particular dappled way that was very beautiful. She sat on the grass and he sat beside her, not close but close enough to talk, and they watched the last of the daylight leave the sky and the stars appear, and the fireworks when they came were reflected in his eyes, and she saw him watch them with something approaching wonder, as though he had forgotten that things like this existed. "Martha Crane says you used to come to the dances," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I did," he said. "Catherine liked to dance. I am not good at it, but she said I was better than I thought, which was either true or kind." He paused. "It was probably kind." "I would not know," she said, "since I have never seen you dance." He looked at her sideways. "Are you suggesting something, Miss Lawson?" "There is a fiddle playing," she said, "and there are people dancing on the green. I am simply noting facts." He looked at the dancers on the green, couples moving in the warm evening air, children darting through and getting underfoot. He looked back at her. His jaw was doing that thing. Then he stood up and extended his hand and said, "I am warning you in advance. I was not exaggerating." She took his hand. His grip was warm and steady and very certain, the grip of someone who, when he decided to do something, committed to it entirely. He was, as he had warned her, not a natural dancer. He was too contained, too careful, but he was not as bad as he believed. And when she laughed at the wrong step, he almost laughed too. She could see it, the thing right there behind his eyes, the laugh, trying to get out. It did not quite make it, not that night, but it was there. After the dancing, he walked her back to the boarding house without being asked, and at the front door he stopped and looked at her with those serious gray eyes and said, "I have not been to town in 9 months." "I know," she said. "I do not know why I came tonight," he said. "August," she said. "Yes, you do." He looked at her for a long time. The street was quiet around them, the celebration winding down, someone still playing the fiddle distantly, the smell of gunpowder from the fireworks still hanging in the warm air. He reached up and touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that was, in its way, both a goodbye and something more. "Good night, Miss Lawson," he said. "Good night, August," she said. She went inside and stood in the hallway for a moment with her eyes closed and her heart doing that thing again. August. August happened fast, the way the hottest months do, heat building from one day to the next until everything is saturated with it and time seems to stop. He finished the roof of the schoolhouse. She knew because she arrived one morning to water the garden and found him on the roof of the little building, and this time he looked down at her when she called up and said, "Almost done, 2 more days." "It looks wonderful," she said. "It needs windows yet," he said. "I ordered glass from Denver. It will be 3 weeks." "You can see the mountains without the glass," she said, "but I think the windows will be better when winter comes." He looked at her from the roof. "You think you will still be here in winter," he said, and it was somewhere between a question and a statement. "I signed a contract for the academic year," she said, "so yes, I expect I will." "And after," he said. She put down her watering can and looked up at him on the roof. "I suppose that depends on a number of things," she said. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he went back to his hammering. But things were shifting. She could feel it the way you feel the season changing, not in a single moment but in the cumulative weight of many small ones. He had started coming into town more regularly. Not every week, but often enough that people noticed. And Martha Crane had begun giving Anna significant looks over the breakfast table that Anna met with serenity she only partially felt. He brought her things, small things, without making much of them. A rabbit he had shot and dressed properly for her dinner, a jar of honey from a wild hive he had found near the creek, a piece of turquoise he had found in the creek bed that he said, very offhandedly, was probably just a rock, but the color was interesting. She kept the turquoise on her windowsill. She thought it was the most deliberately understated thing anyone had ever done for her, and she found it completely endearing. In the middle of August, there was trouble. It was not the kind of dramatic trouble that makes stories, but the kind that is worse. A land dispute between two neighboring ranchers, a man named Reed and a man named Garrett, over a water source that both of them needed for their cattle. The dispute had been simmering for months, and in the heat of August it came to a boil in the middle of Harlan Creek's main street on a Thursday afternoon, loud and ugly, and with the particular flavored danger of men with guns and genuine grievances and not enough water. August was in town. He had come in for supplies. Anna was crossing the street from the schoolhouse when it happened, Reed's men and Garrett's men facing each other in the street, and the air thickened with the kind of tension that precedes bad decisions. She saw August step between the two groups. She would have said she was frightened, but the truth was she was more afraid for him than for herself, and the distinction felt important. He did not draw a gun. He put himself in the middle of the street and spoke in the tone of a man who has been working with frightened horses long enough to know that the voice matters more than the words. And what he said was measured and direct, and did not give either side anything to be more angry about. He acknowledged that both men had legitimate need of the water. He pointed out that the creek ran year-round and that a shared access arrangement had worked between neighboring ranches in this valley before. He suggested that Sheriff Daniels, who was already appearing in the doorway of his office across the street, would be the appropriate person to facilitate that conversation. It worked. Not immediately and not without a great deal of bristling, but it worked. The men went with the sheriff. The street cleared. Anna walked to where August was standing. He was watching the last of the men file into the sheriff's office, and when she came up beside him he looked at her, and she could see that his hands were not entirely steady, not from fear, she thought, but from the specific tension of a man who had put himself in the path of something dangerous and was now processing the fact that he had done it. "That was well done," she said. "I did not want anyone to get shot," he said. "Harlan Creek is too small to carry that kind of weight." She thought about the way he had stepped into that street, and she thought about him driving to Denver for medicine and building a schoolhouse out of love and replacing a well chain so the water would be easier to draw, and she thought, "I am in considerable trouble with this man, and I am entirely at peace with that." "Would you come to supper?" she said. "Martha always makes too much on Thursdays." He looked at her. "I should get back to the ranch," he said. "August," she said, "come to supper." He came to supper. Martha, to her profound credit, greeted him as though it were completely ordinary, fed him an enormous meal, and then announced that she had letters to write and disappeared upstairs with the specific tactical genius of a woman who knows exactly what she is doing. Anna and August sat at the kitchen table with the last of the coffee and the windows open, and the evening air coming in cool and sage-scented. And she told him about the argument she had gotten into with the school board about acquiring a second set of arithmetic primers. And he told her about the roan, who had now stopped shying at shadows and had started seeking him out in the mornings, which he said, with a very slight change in his voice, was the first time an animal had done that with him in a long time. "Things respond to patience," she said. He looked at her across the table. He had his hat off. He had come inside properly, hat off, which Martha had noticed and Anna had noticed though neither had said so, and his hair was dark with a few threads of early gray at the temples, and his eyes in the lamplight were not quite the flat gray she had first known, but were warmer, more complicated, like the sky above a storm rather than the storm itself. "I have been thinking," he said, and stopped. She waited. "About the schoolhouse," he said. "The windows should be in by September. I thought it would make a good reading room, or storage for the school in town if you need overflow." He paused. "Or something else." "What's something else?" she said. He looked at his coffee cup. "I have been thinking that the east pasture needs fencing, and the house could use the kitchen needs work. I have been putting things off." He was quiet for a moment. "I think I have been putting things off." "Yes," she said gently, "I think you have." He looked up. "I do not know how to do this," he said. It was, she understood, the most honest thing he had said to her and possibly to anyone in 2 years. "I do not know. I am not the same as I was before. I am aware of that. I do not know if I can be." "August," she said, "I am not asking you to be who you were before. I am asking you to be who you are now." The lamplight sat between them on the table, and outside the crickets were loud and steady, and somewhere down the street someone was closing up the silver mare for the night, the sound of the doors carrying clearly in the quiet. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. His hand was large and work-roughened and completely certain in its gesture. The way everything he did was certain once he decided to do it. She turned her hand over and held his. They stayed like that for a while, in the warm kitchen with the coffee going cold between them, and the house settled around them in the particular way of houses that have absorbed a lot of life and know what it looks like when it starts again. Martha Crane, at the top of the stairs, heard nothing and saw nothing, and went to bed with the satisfied expression of a woman whose instincts have been validated. September. The glass came from Denver, and August spent a week fitting it into the window frames of the little schoolhouse. And when he was done, he brought Anna out to see it and stood back while she walked through the door and stopped. The autumn light came in through the 4 windows and lay in long, warm rectangles on the pine floor. The mountains were visible through the east window, blue-gray and enormous. The room smelled of pine and fresh putty and something that was almost like the beginning of something. She turned around and he was in the doorway watching her, and she said, "It is perfect." He looked at the room. He was very quiet. Then he said she would have liked it. She would have loved it, Anna said. And August, it is right to have finished it. Not in spite of her, because of her. He looked at her, and the wall was still there, she could see it, but it had been going through such a transformation over these months, the great solid structure of his grief and self-protection, that it barely resembled what it had been in April. The flowers were everywhere now. The marigolds had bloomed themselves brilliant all summer long. The sweet peas were beginning to wind down with the cooling temperatures, but they had climbed 6 feet and produced flowers from June through September. The black-eyed Susans were still going, golden and sturdy, refusing to admit that autumn was coming. She had planted lavender seeds in late June, and they had established themselves quietly and would bloom next year, she thought. Next year. He crossed the room to where she was standing and stopped very close. She could see his pulse at his throat, and his chest was moving with breathing that was slightly less steady than his usual, and his hands were at his sides, and then they were not. One hand came up and touched her face with the same careful, certain quality as everything else he did, and she put her hand over his and held it against her cheek. "I did not think I would feel this again," he said. "I did not think it was something that happened twice." "I know," she said. "I am afraid of it," he said. "That is the truth. I am telling you the truth." "I know that too," she said. "And August, I want you to hear me. I am not going anywhere. I am not Catherine, and I am not a replacement for Catherine, and I do not expect to be. But I am here. I am very much here. And I am fairly certain I have been falling in love with you since approximately the 2nd Thursday of May." He looked at her. The corner of his mouth moved. And then, quietly, privately, the thing she had been watching move closer for 6 months, the laugh came out. It was soft and low and rusty with disuse, and it was the most beautiful sound she had heard in years. "The 2nd Thursday of May," he said. "The bench." "The bench," she agreed. He kissed her. It was quiet and deliberate and very serious in the way that he was serious, and when he pulled back slightly he was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on him before, an expression so open it was almost startling on a face that had been so long closed. She thought, there it is. There he is, October, November. The courtship, which was what it had been from the beginning, even before either of them had used that word, moved into something more settled and more clearly named. He came to town twice a week. She rode out to the ranch on Saturdays. The garden was past its season, the frost having done what frost does, but the roots were in the ground and the perennial seeds had seeded themselves, and she knew, with a gardener's certainty, that in the spring they would come back, more of them, stronger. He asked her to ride the property with him one October afternoon, and she did. The the two of them on horseback in the cool golden light through the grass that had gone amber with the season. He showed her the east pasture he was planning to fence, and the stretch of creek where the cottonwoods turned vivid yellow, and the high point of the property from which you could see 3 valleys and the front range of the Rockies stretching north and south as far as the eye reached, and it was so extraordinarily beautiful that she stopped her horse and just looked for a long time without saying anything. "I have not been up here since Catherine died," he said. He was sitting his horse easily beside her, looking at the view. "We used to come here in the fall. She said it was the best place on earth." "She was right," Anna said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Anna." He had been using her first name since August, and each time it still carried a particular weight. "I want to ask you something." She looked at him. The October light was doing extraordinary things to everything, his face, the grass, the mountains. "I want to ask you to marry me," he said. "I want to be clear that I understand what I am. I am not easy to know. I am not a man who fills a room. I have a great deal of work still to do on myself, and I know that. But I also know that I want you here. I want you to stay." She looked at him on his horse in the October light with the 3 valleys spread out below them and the Rockies filling the sky and the amber grass, and thought, "I came here on a broken wagon in the middle of the night and walked across a field at dawn toward a man on a roof who did not want to see me, and everything since then has been the best thing that has happened to me in my whole life." "Yes," she said. "August Monroe, yes." He reached across the space between their horses and took her hand. His grip was what it had always been, warm, steady, completely certain. She thought about the first morning she had shaken his hand at the wagon wheel, the flatness in his eyes then, and looked at those eyes now and thought, there is nothing flat in them anymore. Nothing flat at all. They were married in the Harlan Creek church on the last day of November, 1882. The church was full, which surprised August, who had not counted on how many people in Harlan Creek had been quietly pulling for him, and who were not going to miss this even for pressing ranch work. Martha Crane was in the front row and cried openly and without embarrassment. Eli and Helen Prout sat beside her. Rosie and Clara Prout wore their best dresses, and Rosie had brought her arithmetic slate to show Anna one last time before the ceremony, which Anna thought was perfectly characteristic. The sheriff was there, and the doctor, and half the ranching families in the valley, and even Reed and Garrett were present, seated on opposite sides of the church but present nonetheless, which Anna thought was a good sign for the water dispute. August wore his good clothes and had shaved and stood at the front of the church with the expression of a man who is doing something terrifying and necessary and right, and when she came down the aisle he looked at her with those gray eyes that were not flat anymore and never would be again, and the expression on his face was something she would carry for the rest of her life. The minister said the words. August said the words. Anna said the words. He put a ring on her finger that he had made himself, not a jeweler's ring but a wide gold band that he had made in Denver to his specifications, simple and solid and permanent. She looked at it on her hand and thought it was exactly right. Martha Crane threw rice and cried some more, and the fiddle player from the 4th of July appeared from somewhere and began playing immediately after the ceremony. And August Monroe danced at his own wedding in the November cold outside the church with his wife in his arms and laughed. Really laughed, full and warm and completely genuine, when she stepped on his foot trying a complicated turn and said an uncomplimentary word that was technically inappropriate for the schoolteacher to say in public. "You are wonderful," he said, still laughing. "I am very clumsy," she said. "You are wonderfully clumsy," he said, "and you are my wife." He said the word as though testing it, as though it were something he had been afraid to hold again and had found was not what he feared but something entirely new. She put her head against his shoulder. "Yes," she said, "I am." They moved into the ranch house together at the start of December, and she brought her trunk of books and her tin of biscuits and the turquoise from her windowsill, and he had made space for all of it, had, she saw, cleared the bookshelves and arranged them with a particular careful logic that made her heart do that thing again. He had made space. That was the thing. Not grudgingly, not with the performance of effort, but simply and genuinely made room in his house and his life for the presence of another person. And she understood how enormous that was for a man who had spent 2 years trying to keep everything very small and very contained. That winter was a hard one, as Colorado winters are, and they weathered it together. They fell into a life with the natural ease of two people whose rhythms are compatible in the fundamental way, early risers both, comfortable with silence and equally comfortable with conversation, sharing the work of the ranch and the house with a democratic practicality that suited them both. She continued to teach at the schoolhouse, riding into town most days through the winter on a good mare August gave her, a steady gray he had trained himself. He continued to work the ranch, the roan and the 3 other horses, the cattle he had built up slowly over 2 years, the fences and the fields and the endless incremental work of maintaining land in the high country. But it was not only work. It was never only work. They read to each other in the evenings. They worked their way through his 11 books, and then through hers, and then Eli Prout began ordering things from Denver specifically for them, and it became a standing arrangement. They sat on the front porch on the warm evenings that came eventually, as warm evenings always do even in the hardest winters, and watched the stars wheel overhead. He told her about Kansas in the detail that he had not offered before, the family, the brothers he had lost, the father who had been hard to love and whom he had loved anyway. She told him about Pueblo and her mother's particular way of explaining difficult things to children, and how she had tried to copy it in her own teaching and felt like she was still learning. He told her about Catherine and the way that people tell important stories, not all at once but in pieces, at the right moments, and she received each piece with the care it deserved. She understood that Catherine Monroe was not a ghost between them, but a part of his history that had made him who he was, and she did not want him to be anyone other than who he was, because who he was the man who had handed her a wagon wheel, without being asked, and built a bench beside her garden, and stepped into a dangerous street between armed men, and laughed at his own wedding like a man who had remembered that the world contains things worth laughing at. Spring came back around, as it always does, and on the first warm morning of April, Anna put on her work gloves and went out to the fence line. The marigolds were coming back. Not just coming back, they had self-seeded through the fall and spread, and the new growth was pushing through in a drift 3 times wider than she had originally planted. The sweet peas were sending up new shoots at the fence post, thin green threads reaching for the wood. The lavender she had planted the previous June was establishing itself, with the quiet determination of a plant that knows it is going to be there for a long time. She was crouching in the garden examining a marigold seedling when she heard him come through the gate. He crouched beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, and looked at the new growth. "More of them this year," he said. "They spread," she said. "Give them a few more years and they will be all the way to the road." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the flowers. Then he said, in the voice he used for things that mattered, "Are you happy here?" She looked at him. He was looking at the garden, not at her, and she understood the question had cost him something, and he needed a moment before he could receive the answer. "August Monroe," she said. "I have never been happier in my life." He looked at her then. The gray eyes, warm now, consistently warm in a way that was simply who he was, not a performance but the natural state of a man who had returned to himself. He put his arm around her and she leaned into him, and they both looked at the marigolds coming up orange and gold in the April morning, the same way they had come up the first time, only bigger now and more sure of themselves, as things are when they have survived a winter. She had something to tell him. She had been waiting for the right moment, which she had decided was this one. "August," she said, "I need to tell you something." He looked at her. She could see him reading her face, that careful, attentive way he had. "We are going to have a baby," she said. He went very still. The kind of still that is not absence but the opposite, a presence so concentrated it requires stillness to contain it. She watched his face move through something she could not entirely track and did not try to, giving him the time to find his way through it. He put both arms around her. He pulled her close against him and held on in the way of a man who has lost things and knows the weight of that, and knows also what it means to be given something back. She could feel his breath in her hair and the solid warmth of him and the April sun on both of them. When he said, his voice was different. "October, I think," she said. "I am going to need to stop teaching by September. The school board will need to find someone," he said, with such immediate practical concern for her situation that she loved him even more for it. "They will manage," she said. "Or I will teach until the baby comes. I have not decided. I may teach until the end. I feel perfectly well." He pulled back enough to look at her. His hands were on her face the way they had been in the schoolhouse that September day, the same deliberate care. He did not say anything more for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you." "Thank you," she said back, and smiled, and he kissed her forehead with the gravity of a man who understands what is being given. The summer of 1883 passed in the particular way of summers that contain both ordinary life and the building anticipation of something extraordinary. Anna taught through June and July and into August, growing visibly and steadily, and teaching arithmetic and reading and history to the children of Harlan Creek with the same attentiveness she had always had. And the children, who all knew about the baby in the wordless thorough way of children, treated her with a touching combination of their usual behavior and periodic offerings of drawings and wildflowers, and, in the case of Thomas from the telegraph office, a carefully reasoned explanation of why she should name the baby after Ulysses S. Grant if it was a boy. She thanked him for his input and did not commit to anything. August finished fencing the east pasture. He expanded the cattle operation, cautiously, in the measured way of someone who is building something intended to last. He repaired the kitchen, properly this time, not just functionally, and built new shelves and replaced the window that had been drafty since before he arrived. He built a cradle, which took him 3 weeks of evenings and was so beautifully made that when he brought it into the bedroom, Anna stood and looked at it for a long time without speaking. "You built a cradle," she said finally. "I had the wood," he said. "August," she said, "you made dovetail joints." He looked at the cradle. "It should be sturdy," he said. "Children shake things." She sat down on the bed and looked at her husband standing beside the cradle he had built with dovetail joints, and she thought about the man she had first seen on that roof in the dawn light, the deliberate solitude, the fortress built of grief and time, and she thought about the way walls come down not with force but with patient, consistent, loving presence, flowers planted outside a fortress, until the person inside comes to the window to look at them. August Monroe had come to the window. He had opened the door. He had built a bench and replaced a chain and stepped into a dangerous street and danced at his wedding and laughed. He had given her everything he knew how to give and was daily learning to give more, and she understood that this was not a small thing. For some people it is the bravest thing there is. On the 14th of October, 1883, in the ranch house at the edge of Harlan Creek, their son was born. He was large and loud and immediately opinionated about the world, which Anna found completely appropriate given his parentage. The doctor came and Martha Crane came, and the birth was difficult in the way that births often are but not extraordinary. And when it was done and the baby was placed in her arms, she looked at her son's face, red and scrunched and furious with the indignity of arrival, and felt something so large and so complete that it had no word she knew for it. August sat beside her on the bed. He was still slightly pale, and his hands were shaking very slightly, the aftermath of 3 hours of being entirely unable to fix something that needed fixing, which had clearly been an ordeal for him. But when the baby was placed in his arms, and the doctor did it without asking, simply placed the baby in his arms as a matter of course, the expression on August Monroe's face was something that no word in any language she knew was adequate to describe. He looked at his son for a very long time without speaking. The baby had stopped being outraged by existence, and was now simply looking back at his father with the unfocused but weighty attention of the newborn. "He looks like," August started and stopped. "Like himself," Anna said. "He looks like himself." August looked at her. "Like you, actually," he said. "The shape of the eyes. And the set of the jaw is entirely you," she said. Back at the baby. "What do we call him?" he said. It had been a conversation they had been having for months without resolution, which was partly because she wanted his input and he kept declining to offer preferences and she kept declining to make the decision unilaterally. "You tell me," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "James," he said. "My father's name. He was difficult and I loved him and he built things that lasted." He paused. "James Monroe." "James Monroe," she said. "Yes." James Monroe opened his mouth and made a sound of such confident self-assertion that August, despite everything, laughed. Warm and full and entirely genuine, echoing in the October bedroom, while outside the window the last of the autumn marigolds were catching the afternoon light. The years settled around them the way good things do, not with a crash or a fanfare, but with the steady accumulation of ordinary days that are, when you are paying attention, not ordinary at all. James was a boy of enormous energy and strong opinions, and a fascination with horses that appeared at approximately 14 months old and never went away. By the time he could walk reliably, he was trying to get into the corral, and August, who had begun to teach him the roan's habits at an age when other children were still learning to say full sentences, was patient with him in the deep, unhurried way he was patient with everything. Anna watched them together in the early morning sometimes, the tall, lean father and the small, determined boy at the fence, and felt the particular happiness that exists at the intersection of what is and what you had hoped for. The schoolhouse on the east side of the property, Catherine's schoolhouse, finished and windowed, the mountains visible through the glass, became James's first classroom. Anna taught him his letters there at a small desk August built to match the window height, so the boy could look at the mountains when he needed to think, the way his father did. It was a private thing, the three of them, but she loved it for exactly that reason. In the spring of 1885, Anna told August she was expecting again. He received this news in the same way he received most significant news, with stillness, and then with complete, quiet certainty. He put down the fence tool he was working with and looked at her and said, "When?" "November," she said. He picked up her hand and held it for a moment. Then he said, "I should build another room." "We have time," she said. "I would like to start now," he said. "If that is all right." She thought about a man who responded to love with building, with the creation of solid, lasting, physical things that could stand in the rain and the wind, and hold up against what came. She thought about a bench beside a garden and a schoolhouse with dovetail windows and a cradle for a baby, and now another room for another child who did not yet exist in the world, but for whom the walls were already going up in love. "Start now," she said. "Please." Their daughter was born in the first week of November 1885 on a morning when the first snow was coming down outside, quiet and thick, and the world was very white and still. She was smaller than James had been and quieter from the first moment, looking at the world with a considered attention that made Anna think of her husband's eyes. They called her Catherine. August received this suggestion from Anna with a silence that lasted long enough that she had begun to worry it was the wrong idea, and then he said, in a voice that was entirely steady and entirely full, "Yes, I would like that." Catherine Monroe arrived in the world and settled into the ranch house, and into the family with the calm assurance of someone who understood perfectly where she belonged. James, who was 2 years old, regarded her for approximately 48 hours with the suspicion natural to displaced first children, and then decided she was acceptable, and by the time she was 6 months old he was deeply protective of her in the bossy, devoted way of older brothers everywhere. Harlan Creek changed around them through the years, as towns do. The railroad came through the valley in 1887, close enough to matter, and the town grew and the school grew, and Anna went back to teaching when Catherine was old enough, and the school board, which had managed without her for 2 years with a series of less satisfactory arrangements, was so grateful for her return that they gave her everything she had asked for in the way of books and supplies, and the second set of arithmetic primers that had been the subject of that original argument. Rosie Prout, who had been 11 when Anna arrived, was 22 now and studying to be a teacher herself. She had written to Anna while she was away at school in Denver, and Anna had written back every week without fail. And when Rosie came home, the summer of 1888, Anna sat with her on the front porch of the boarding house. Martha Crane was still running it, still dispensing opinions with generous authority, and they talked about arithmetic and children and the particular work of teaching. And Anna thought about how the things you give to other people are always larger than what you keep. August and Eli Prout had become something approaching friends, in the particular fashion of men who do not use that word but who seek each other's company, and whose regard for each other is evident even in silence. Eli would sometimes ride out to the ranch on a Sunday afternoon under the pretense of discussing feed or supply questions, and would end up staying for supper. And August would sometimes stop in the general store for longer than strictly necessary, and they argued good-naturedly about politics and the railroad and the proper management of cattle in the manner of men who are comfortable enough with each other to disagree without caution. The water dispute between Reed and Garrett was settled properly in 1886 with a shared easement agreement that both men eventually admitted was reasonable. And August's role in diffusing the original conflict was something that people in Harlan Creek had not forgotten and had, in the way of small towns, transformed into a story that was slightly larger than the actual event, which he found embarrassing and she found completely wonderful. In the spring of 1888, on a warm April morning that smelled exactly like the April morning 6 years before when she had first walked across the field with her work gloves and her seeds, Anna stood at the fence line of the Monroe ranch and looked at the garden. It was remarkable. 6 years of self-seeding and spreading, and the occasional intentional addition had produced something that was no longer just a garden along a fence line, but a whole establishment, marigolds running 30 feet in both directions from the original planting. Black-eyed Susan spread wide in a drift that reached to the road, sweet peas gone architectural on the fence posts, lavender thick and gray-green, and already promising flowers for June. Roses she had added in 1884 were enormous now, climbing the gate post with the confidence of permanence. There were hollyhocks and larkspur and columbine, Colorado's own, which had seeded themselves in from the surrounding land and decided to stay. August came up behind her. He put his hands on her shoulders and looked at the garden over her head. James was somewhere in the field with a small horse he was learning to work on a lead line, his high, intent voice carrying on the still morning air. Catherine was in the house with the housekeeper they had taken on the previous year, a capable woman named Rosa who had 3 children of her own, and ran the domestic side of the ranch with an efficiency that freed Anna to teach and freed August to work without either of them falling behind on anything. "Do you remember," she said, "when you told me the ground was too dry and the flowers would not grow?" "I was not being helpful," he said, and she could hear the smile in it. "No," she said, "you were not." She leaned back against him slightly. "I was thinking about that first morning, you on the roof. I walked all the way across that field and you pretended not to hear me." "I heard you," he said. "I know you heard me," she said. "You had been watching me since I turned off the road." "I was monitoring a potential situation," he said with great dignity. She laughed. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. They looked at the garden together in the April light, the marigolds coming up again in their annual insistence, and she thought about everything that had grown from those first seeds. Not just the flowers, though the flowers were extraordinary, but the years and the children and the man behind her who had come so far from that roof in the dawn, and so far from the person who had been alone on a closed-up ranch with his grief and his fortress walls, and who was now standing in the morning sun with his wife in front of a garden that had been planted from the outside in the firm belief that something was worth finding inside. "August," she said. "Yes," he said. "I love you," she said. Simply, the way she said the truest things. He turned her gently around to face him. The gray eyes, warm and clear and entirely open. The jaw still carved from something harder than ordinary stone, but the whole face alive in a way that it had not been when she first walked across his field. He cupped her face in his hands, those careful, certain hands, and looked at her with the full weight of 6 years of becoming, of the life they had built together out of a broken wagon wheel and a jar of strawberry preserves and seeds planted stubbornly outside a fortress. "I love you," he said. "I love you, Anna." Behind them, James's voice carried across the field, high and delighted, saying something to the horse that they could not quite make out. The garden caught the morning light. The mountains filled the sky. In the small finished schoolhouse on the east side of the property, the April sun came through Catherine Monroe's windows and lay warm on the pine floor where no ghost lived, only good memory, properly kept. August Monroe kissed his wife in the April morning, unhurried and certain, in the way of a man who has learned not without cost, not without grief, not without the patient, persistent love of a woman who understood that sometimes the best thing you can do for a fortress is not knock on the door but simply start planting flowers outside, that the world is capable of giving you, if you let it, more than you lost. The marigolds were orange and gold and brilliant in the morning light, and they would be back again next spring, and the spring after that, and for as many springs as the ground held memory of having been cared for. James Monroe led the small horse in a careful circle and looked over at his parents and made a face that only a 6-year-old boy can make at the sight of adults being affectionate, and then looked back at the horse with great concentration, because the horse was more interesting than kissing, and Catherine in the house was trying to say a new word and Rosa was clapping her hands and encouraging her, and the ranch existed in the full, warm, particular noise of a life being lived in it. And that was how it went. Day after day, season after season, the quiet accumulation of ordinary, extraordinary days that are, if you are paying attention, the whole of what a good life is. Harlan Creek grew. The schoolhouse got a third room added in 1890, which Anna oversaw with proprietary satisfaction, and which the school board funded without significant argument because they had learned, in the 8 years since she arrived, that arguing with Anna Lawson Monroe on matters of education was an exercise without a favorable outcome for them. Rosie Prout came back from Denver with her teaching certificate and began teaching the older children while Anna took the younger ones, and the combination worked beautifully, the way combinations do when the people involved genuinely like each other and the work. James turned 10 and showed no signs of wanting to be anything other than a horseman, which August regarded with the private satisfaction of a man who has passed something forward. Catherine turned 7 and was reading 2 years above her age and had her grandmother's gift for mathematics, which made Anna think of Rosie at 11 and the brightness that good teaching can find and cultivate. She was teaching her own daughter arithmetic at the kitchen table in the evenings, and August would sometimes watch from the doorway with the expression she had come to know as contentment, pure and unperformed. In 1891, there was another baby, another boy, whom they called Thomas William, after Anna's father and after the relentless questioning boy from the telegraph office, who was now a young man working the wire in Denver, and who, upon being told the name, wrote back a letter of such genuine and uncomplicated pleasure that Anna kept it in her book of important things. Thomas Monroe was born in July in the summer, and was from the first moment a cheerful and sociable child who smiled at everyone and seemed constitutionally incapable of unhappiness, which his father found somewhat astonishing and his mother found completely wonderful. 3 children, a finished schoolhouse, a garden that had taken over the fence line and was threatening the road allowance, a ranch that was prospering through careful management and good horses and the kind of daily attention that creates, over time, something worth passing on. August was 39 and lean and sun-darkened, and the gray at his temples had spread, and he was, she thought, one of the most attractive men she had ever seen, which she told him on a regular basis, and which he received with the same combination of dismissal and evident pleasure that he had always received compliments. He worked with the horses still, the roan long gone now but replaced and replaced again, and there was a quality to the way he worked with animals that people came from other ranches to see and sometimes to ask for help with, and he helped when he could and taught what he knew, and it was, she had observed, good for him. The being needed, the being of use to other people, which was different from the being of use only to a piece of land. He had become, over the years, a man who could be in a room of people comfortably. Not the life of any party, never that, but present and engaged and genuinely interested in others in the way of a person who has been reminded that other people are worth the trouble. He still had his silences, and she still valued them. He still went quiet sometimes in the particular way that meant he was far away in some interior place she did not always follow him into, and she had learned to read the difference between the silence that wanted company and the silence that needed space, and to give him each accordingly. She still had her stubbornness, which she still preferred to call dedication. She still found problems she could not resist trying to solve. She still kept a tin of biscuits in her desk at the schoolhouse for the children who came in hungry, and she still never made a fuss about it, and some of those children were now grown with children of their own, and if they remembered anything about their schooling in Harlan Creek, they remembered that there was always a biscuit when you needed one, and that Miss Lawson, Mrs. Monroe, had made them feel like their minds were interesting and worth something. The 4th of July, 1891. Harlan Creek's celebration was considerably larger than it had been in 1882. The town was bigger, the festivities more elaborate, the fireworks more ambitious. The picnic on the green was crowded and loud and wonderful, and James ate too much, and Thomas fell asleep in Anna's arms before the fireworks, and Catherine watched the whole display with wide eyes and the expression of someone storing information for future use. August sat beside her on the blanket they had spread on the grass, Thomas asleep between them, James somewhere in the crowd with the Prout children and Catherine next to her mother, and he was looking at the fireworks with the same quality of attention he had given them the first time she had seen him at a celebration, except that his face was completely different now. Not the face of someone at the edge of the crowd calculating the distance to the exit, the face of a man in the middle of his own life, present in it, glad of it. She leaned against his shoulder. He put his arm around her. Thomas slept on with the profound unconsciousness of a healthy child who has had an excellent day. "Remember the first 4th of July I saw you here," she said. "You dragged me off to a cottonwood tree," he said. "You were standing at the edge looking miserable," she said. "Someone had to intervene." "I was not miserable," he said. "I was reconnoitering." "You are the only person in Harlan Creek who uses the word reconnoitering unironically," she said. "I learned it from one of your books," he said. She laughed. He kissed the top of her head. The fireworks were going off in great booms and blooms of color overhead, and reflecting in the creek at the edge of the green, and the crowd was making the sounds crowds make when something beautiful is happening in the sky, and she thought, "This is a full life. This is a life filled up to the brim. This is everything that the seeds were for." Martha Crane, who was 71 and showed no signs of slowing down, appeared beside them with a plate of something she had made and insisted they eat, and they ate it. And she sat with them for a while, and told them a story about the early days of Harlan Creek that she had told before but told well, and that August listened to with the particular attentiveness he gave to stories about the places he lived in, understanding that knowing a place's history was part of belonging to it. After the fireworks, walking home with sleeping Thomas over August's shoulder and James and Catherine ahead of them on the road, the night full of stars and the smell of gunpowder and late summer, Anna said, "Are you happy, August Monroe?" He was quiet for a moment in the way that meant he was taking the question seriously. Then he said, "Yes, I did not think that was something I would say again and mean it. But yes. Good, she said, and took his free hand. He held it all the way home. The stars were very bright over the valley, and the mountains were dark shapes against the darker sky, and the road was familiar under their feet. The road they had traveled together so many times in so many seasons that it had become part of what they were. He had walls around him thicker than any fortress when she found him. She had not knocked. She had simply started planting flowers outside, steady and patient, and entirely convinced that something worth finding was in there. And she had been right, and the flowers were everywhere now, bright and permanent and rooted deep, in the ground and in the life they had made together. In the morning she would wake early and make coffee, and he would come in from checking the horses, and they would sit together in the kitchen before the children were awake and talk, or not talk, comfortable either way. And James would come down first, as he always did, already thinking about the horses, and Catherine would follow, serious and awake and ready for whatever the day contained, and Thomas would come last, still warm from sleep, and sit in his father's lap and look around at the morning with his natural openness and his mother's brown eyes. And the marigolds outside would be blooming. They were always blooming now, from April through October, orange and gold and utterly reliable, along the fence line of the Monroe ranch at the edge of Harlan Creek, Colorado, where a woman had once arrived on a broken wagon at midnight and walked across a field at dawn toward a man on a roof who did not want to see her, and had seen in him, before he could see it in himself, everything that was worth seeing. The garden would be there in the morning. It would be there next spring. It would be there, Anna Monroe thought, walking up the front porch steps under the stars with her husband's hand warm in hers, for as long as there was ground to plant it in and light enough to grow by. And that, she thought, was quite long enough. It was, as it turned out, exactly right.